Hi students, this is Uma Mageshwari from St. Joseph's College of Arts and Science, Kadalur. This video is for the paper British Poetry 2. In this video, we are going to see the analysis of the poem God's Grandeur written by J.M. Hopkins. Let's see the brief introduction about the poet. J.M. Hopkins, born on 28th July 1844, was an English poet and Jesuit priest whose posthumous fame established him among the leading Victorian poets. His manipulation of prosody, particularly his concept of sprung rhythm, established him as an innovative writer of verse, as did his technique of praising God through wonderful use of imagery and nature. By 1930, his work was recognized as one of the most original literary accomplishments of his century. It had a marked influence on such leading 20th century poets as T.S. Eliot, Dylan Thomas, W.H. Auden, Stephen Spender, and Cecil D. Lewis. After suffering ill health for several years, Hopkins died of typhoid fever in 1889. However, on his deathbed, his last words were, I'm so happy, I loved my life. Only after his death, Robert Bridges began to publish a few Hopkins mature poems in anthologies, hoping to prepare the way for wider acceptance of his style. Let's discuss about the poem. God's Grandeur is a sonnet written in 1877, but as with many of his poems, it was also not published until almost 30 years after his death in 1889. The word grandeur means grandness or magnificence. In God's Grandeur, Hopkins conveys his reverence for the magnificence of God and nature and his despair about the way that humanity has seemed to lose sight of the close connection between God and nature during the Second Industrial Revolution. Though the poem is a traditional 14-line sonnet, it's also an example of Hopkins' characteristic use of unconventional poetic meters. Let's move on to the poem God's Grandeur. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to your greatness like the ooze of oil, crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Let's analyze the first 4 lines. The first quatrain describes a natural world through which God's presence runs like an electric current, becoming visible in flashes like the refracted glinting of light produced by metal foil when rumpled. Likewise, God's presence is a rich oil, a kind of sap that wells up to a greatness when tapped with a certain kind of pressure. Given these clear and strong proofs of God's presence in the world, the poet asks how human beings fail to heed his divine authority. The second quatrain. Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, beard smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can food feel, being shod. Let's analyze these 4 lines. The second quatrain describes the state of contemporary human life, that is, the blind repetitiveness of human labor and the sordidness and stain of toil and trade. The landscape in its natural state reflects God as its creator, but industry and the prioritization of the economic over the spiritual have transformed the landscape and robbed humans of their sensitivity to those few beauties of nature still left. The shoes people wear sever the physical connection between our feet and the earth they walk on, symbolizing an ever-increasing spiritual alienation from nature. Let's move on to the sestet. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights of the black west went, O morning, at the brown brink eastward springs. Because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. Let's analyze the sestet. These lines asserts that in spite of the fallenness of Hopkins' contemporary Victorian world, nature does not cease offering up its spiritual indices. Permeating the world is a deep freshness that testifies to the continual renewing power of God's creation. This power of renewal is seen in the way morning always waits on the other side of dark night. The source of this constant regeneration is the grace of a God who broods over a seemingly lifeless world with the patient nurture of a mother hen. This final image is one of God guarding the potential of the world and containing within himself the power and promise of rebirth. With a final exclamation, that is, of bright wings, Hopkins suggests both an oft intuition of the beauty of God's grace and the joyful suddenness of a hatchling bird emerging out of God's loving incubation. This is the short summary of the poem. Let's analyze the poetic devices and figurative languages used in the poem. Enjambment. Enjambment occurs in 4 places, that is in line number 3, 7, 11 and 13. It is used in order to emphasize certain words or even to create reading experience that mirrors what is being described in the poem. At the end of lines 3 and 7, the poem contains enjambment with caesura to create a dramatic effect. In line number 11, the enjambment at the end of a sentence about a sunset causes the line to continue right into the next line about a subsequent sunrise, emphasizing the connection between sunrise and sunset, which together represent the cyclic nature of death and rebirth. The enjambment in line number 13 focuses the words meant and world, which can be read as emphasizing the brokenness of the world as well as the way that God nurtures that broken world to create new life. Throughout God's grandeur, enjambment creates emphasis and rhythm that hones and supports the meaning of the poem's language. Let's analyze the form, meter and rhyme scheme of the poem. Form. God's Grandeur is an Italian sonnet, consists of 14 lines. The poem begins with an 8-line stanza called an octave, which is itself made up of 2 4-line quatrains, and ends with a 6-line stanza called a sestet, which is made up of 2 3-line tercets. Meter. While God's Grandeur follows the form of an Italian sonnet, there is only one difference. Italian sonnets written in English almost always use the meter iambic pentameter. For example, in 11th line, there are 5 unstressed stressed pairs of syllables that mark iambic pentameter, but in the first line, there is a different pattern. The poem's meter could be described as mostly iambic pentameter with a bit of a different meter called sprung rhythm mixed in. The poet himself actually invented sprung rhythm. Rhyme scheme. The poem follows a standard Italian sonnet rhyme scheme ABBA, ABBA, CD, CD, CD. Even though the poem follows this traditional rhyme scheme, it also uses various techniques such as caesura, enjambment, and instances of internal rhyme. Thank you.